everyone. My name is Lauren McGoodwin. I'm the founder and CEO of Career Contessa, and we're so excited to be here in New York. Our LA-based team is here, and it's actually amazing when we get to partner with someone like WeWork to have an in-person event. I know you guys are probably very familiar with all of our online resources, so this is really, really special to us. So thank you so much for clearing your Thursday night schedules and coming out here. Hopefully you got a headshot, talked to some hiring managers and all that other good stuff, and we've got lots of great panels coming up as well. So really just want to say thank you to our partner, WeWork, for helping us make SheMarket a reality. Thank you to you guys for your overwhelming enthusiasm. That's exactly what it takes to have more of these. And I'm gonna stop talking so we can move into the panel discussions with some amazing, amazing women. And the first amazing woman I wanna introduce is Sara Pfuhl, who's an executive here at WeWork, who will be interviewing the author of the book that you guys all got, No Hard Feelings, Mollie West Duffy. So Sara, I'll hand it off to you. Thanks, guys.
Also going to be very tall, but I like it. So I have a whole little intro about myself, but I'm super boring, and I'm very excited about the person that I'm going to ask to come up and answer some questions. So I'd like to just go right to her rather than my bio. So Mollie. So Mollie West Duffy is here for me to grill. So I'm going to do a little intro about you, but I just want to tell everybody a story. About 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, I was in a conference room which we were calling the War Room. We were doing a huge project which was unbelievably stressful. God, very stressful. I think probably all of us were on the verge of tears at least 3 times a day. And a friend of mine had this book. Now, I haven't read nothing in the last couple of months because I've been so busy, but I said, "What are you reading?" And she said, "I'm reading this book." Turned out it was this book. And she showed me some pictures, and I read it, and then completely randomly, someone called me and said, "We'd like you to do a Q&A with someone. It's about this book called No Hard Feelings." And I was like, I've just read that book. That's amazing. And I feel like this book I've seen now everywhere. I'm super excited that you're here. So let me do the little intro. In addition to working full-time at IDEO, Mollie also runs a viral Instagram with her partner, Elizabeth Faslian. It's called Liz and Mollie. I don't know how you find time to do that and write this book. And the two of them just released this book, The Secret Power of Embracing Emotions at Work. I can't think of something that I'm more excited to talk about because I feel like my career goes like this all the time, and how to navigate that is incredibly complicated. So I'm glad you're here. Since we're talking about emotions, I think the first question I have is, given the fact that this book is everywhere, how does it feel? Are you excited? Are you like, go me, I'm amazing, this is my book?
It's very overwhelming. We've been working on it for about 2.5 years, so to see it come to life is amazing and rewarding, but also definitely I'm an introvert, so there's a lot of feelings of like, oh, I have to be, it's so nice to be in front of rooms of people, but it can be overwhelming as well. What's been the nicest and unexpected part of it is getting to connect with people who have read the book or who are interested in it, who want to talk about this topic that we don't talk about enough. And so I've gotten to have really deep conversations with a lot of people at events like this, which is nice.
And is there, I mean, I feel like I'm probably older than most of you, but over my career, I've had lots of ups and downs. Was there one thing or a couple of things that made you think, kind of take a step back and think, wow, this is something I really want to dig into and think about, what emotion is and how it makes me function? Like, was there one thing that triggered that?
For me, it was when I was in my early 20s, so about a decade ago, and I was working at a startup, and I came into work one day, and the area above my right eye had gone completely numb. And so I ignored it, and then I went to the doctor, and he said, asked me a few questions, and he said, "Do you have a lot of stress at work?" And I was like, is that like a rhetorical question? Like, yes, I do. And he said, "I think this is caused by stress." And I had this light bulb moment when I walked out of the office realizing that my emotions had come out in a physical manifestation in my body, and that probably meant that I wasn't dealing with my emotions. And I was like, but I don't know how to deal with my emotions in a professional setting because I was never taught that in college. And so that was, and I quit that job a few months later, but I did keep that interest in emotions. And then when Liz and I started writing articles together, her illustrations are really great at visualizing things that are hard to verbalize. And that is emotions, which I think she does a great job with. There's lots of illustrations in the book.
So one of the things you talk about early in the book, which really resonated with me, was about being, and it's counterintuitive because it's about being less passionate about what you're doing. And it's something that I think it's taken me 20 years of working to realize that really I could have worked at various points 20 to 30% less and actually been fine. And my career would have been fine and everything would have been fine, but it's taken me that long to kind of get there. So in some ways, I feel like you're going to give us a little bit of a cheat so that you can avoid the 20-year mistake I made. But what do you mean when you say that? Because I feel like, at least at WeWork, we spend a lot of time talking about passion at work.
So we say there's a new rule of work for each chapter. And in the chapter on health, the rule is to care less about your job, which is like, what? But we don't mean to not care at all. We just mean to care more about yourself. Because in the long run, if you're not caring about yourself and taking care of your health, you are going to be less productive. And so I think this is something that employers should be aware of. The research shows that we top out at our productivity at about 50 hours a week. So if you're working more than that, you're not adding anything to it. And so caring more means taking time to exercise, take vacation, even just like take a 5-minute break to walk around the block when you feel stressed. Do what you need to do. So often we, especially as women, we don't do that. We put ourselves on the back burner.
So just picking up on that, that's a little bit about our managers, right? And the people that we're working with and the people that we're working for. What in the work that you do at IDEO, what do you see in terms of kind of managers and employees and how well they do or don't deal with us having emotions as human beings at work, whether it's stress or just getting way over the 50 hours and feeling like you've had enough? What do you see the mistakes that they make? Or what do they do well?
Yeah. So the biggest mistake I think that managers can make is not leading by example. So we're all humans, including our managers and leaders. And so we talk about this idea of being selectively vulnerable as a leader or a manager, which means that you are vulnerable when it's appropriate and show that you have emotions, but also provide a path forward. So as an example, you could say, I'm feeling really overwhelmed and I have no idea what to do. Probably not a great strategy as a manager, even if you are feeling that. Instead, you could say something like, I'm feeling frustrated as well. Here's what I think we should do in the next 3 months to rectify the situation. If we have managers that don't show any emotion, that then tells everyone else that they're not allowed to show emotion. So it is really important. Also, the research shows that managers who do show emotion somewhat are more trustworthy. However, if they're showing too much, they can go against them and we can not feel like they are good at their job. So you have to strike the right balance. The other thing I think that we can do in organizations is just create the space and time to talk about emotion. So one of the biggest pieces of advice that I think if you take one thing away, it's how can, in your teams, you create the space to do that? And a lot of times the managers have to lead with that. So at IDEO, we do this thing called flights, which is before, during, and after every project. We take the time to say, how do we want to work together as humans? What time do we want to come to work? How do we want to email each other, communicate? What are our non-negotiables? Because it's funny, but we just don't take the time to do that.
And so, given that you're somebody that obviously thinks about this a lot, have you screwed up? I mean, have you had times when you've not done what kind of your rational brain tells you should do? And have you, lost it? And when that happens, because I feel like it's inevitable at some point you don't do what you should be doing, how do you deal with that? Do you apologize? Do you try to, what's the best way to deal with making a mistake like that?
Yeah, so we talk about in the book, there's 2 different types of people. There's under-emoters and over-emoters. And so I think the first thing is to have a good understanding of your emotional expression tendency. And we have a quiz on our website that you can go to take if you want to figure it out. But So for me, I'm actually an under-emoter, which means that I am probably not going to have a yelling fit in the office. But on the other hand, I'm probably going to have times when I don't recognize my emotions or other people's emotions enough. And so that is actually what I've had to apologize before, which is like, I was really frustrated. I didn't acknowledge that you were having emotions and that was important, or I wasn't acknowledging my own emotions and I was just like blazing right through to get to the end result. And I do think it is important to go back to the person. You can be, a few hours later or the next day, and you don't want to apologize for having the emotion because we're human and we do that. But you might want to apologize for the way that you communicated it or didn't communicate it.
So the other thing that you talk about in the book, which I think a lot about, is stress and how we deal with stress. Some people obviously deal with it really well, some people less well. I don't deal with it very well. When you think about stress and just the way that it influences decision making, what advice do you have if we're all going to acknowledge the fact that we're going to have stress in our lives, whether it's at work, out of work, you put those two things together, there's even more stress. How do you kind of work through? I think about this a lot in a startup environment, like high growth, tons and tons of work, lots of stress all the time, and sometimes people kind of use this stress in a good way because it's a motivating force, and sometimes it's very negative. But how do you kind of handle that, particularly if you have a team? Because it's going to affect your decision making and probably their decision making. What's the advice on stress?
Yeah, I'm still on this journey. I haven't figured it out, but couple things that we suggest. So one is trying to take the time to understand the need behind the stress. So then you're feeling this very strong emotion. What is causing it? Is it an upcoming deadline? Is it that you are not sure what your boss needs from you? Is it that you are lacking sleep? Because we talk about emotional granularity, and stress is one of those words that's like not very granular, and so it's actually not that helpful to label it as stress, because it's like, well, what am I going to do about it? Can I make it more specific? Am I having anxiety about a specific thing? Am I frustrated about something? And that takes time because you need to process your emotions and take the time to do that. And when we're half-an-hour meetings back to back every day, so I try and schedule sort of a half an hour at the end of my day to reflect on what's gone on and don't let anyone schedule over it. Because if I don't do that, what happens is I come home, I'm with my husband, I cook dinner, and then as soon as I lie down to go to sleep, that's when that process starts. And we've all been there, and that's not a helpful time to think through all of that. So you have to sort of force yourself to have that reflection earlier so that and some people call it like scheduling time to worry, because your brain's gonna do it if you don't give yourself the time. And once you've identified the need, what are the action steps that you can take?
So the other part in the book that really resonated with me, because it's something I do every single day, which is talking about recruiting and hiring. I'm generally, interviewing a lot of people that are looking for a job. A lot of you are probably looking for a job, interested in interviewing. And I think one of the things you say is that in the first 10 seconds, often people make up their mind. So I'm interviewing someone, and in the first 10 seconds, I've decided, do I like this person? Don't I like this person? Which is kind of scary if you think about it, right? Like that is a little bit scary. I also think there are a lot of studies coming out of Silicon Valley. You have a lot of white guys interviewing a lot of white guys, and they like white guys because they're white guys, and so it kind of has I think a knock-on effect. But what advice do you have, both for people that are doing the interviews, for how to kind of control for that bias, I think, and then for people that are interviewing, how do you deal with just the fact that I do think that's human nature? I think we make those kinds of snap decisions very quickly.
Yes. So if you are the interviewer side, there's a couple of things that you can do to combat that. So one is that you can take the names off of resumes, so just look at blind resumes, which is really helpful for bias. You can also ask for work samples, which are, I think, the best way to truly understand what someone can bring to a job. You can prepare. It sounds really obvious, but I can't tell you how many times I've been pulled into an interview last minute, and I'm like, I have 5 minutes to look over this resume, and that's not really fair to the candidate. And then lastly, you can hire by group, so it's not just one person's decision.
Like you could have a recruiting panel, or at least more than one person that's doing the interview?
Exactly. So it's best usually if you other than like screening calls, if you have 2 people in every interview, because people might see different things, and then have several rounds. So by the time you've done, you maybe have 6 people who can weigh in on the decision, again, to reduce bias. If you are being interviewed, so know that like in an ideal world, all of those things would have happened, but that's probably not the case. And so it is true that probably the decision will have been made by the first 5 minutes. And so things that you can do to sort of get around that are to think about how your body language and your facial expressions are coming off in that first 5 minutes. So put extra effort into that. So smiling, super important, warm body language, leaning in, being present. Unfortunately, it's what someone is looking for is, do I like this person? So whatever you can do to sort of be a friendly human being, especially in those first 5 minutes, that's what you should be focusing on, less about the content, unfortunately.
So that's interesting, because I do feel like I have this experience that I have a resume and then I have a person, and I always like to ask, tell me about yourself. It's like the worst question in the world. But I think that one question is, how much do you, it's not really just about emotions, but how much do you share when you get asked that question? Because I actually think it's a good question just to, because anybody can read the resume, but how much should you share without kind of oversharing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you get asked that question, I think you have to have an answer ready to go practice, so you're not trying to make it up on the spot. It needs to have something that showcases what you're bringing to the table, so the expertise. It also should have like a story that they're going to remember. So the story that I like always told when I was in my early 20s was I lived in a house with 9 girls my senior year, and I was labeled the president of the house. And this wasn't like a self-label, this was like given to me because I'm just somebody that like, I like organizing things. So it's like a super memorable thing. It tells you a lot about my personality. It's not oversharing. I'm not like going into like, and let me tell you about the dynamics in the house. And it should be short. So I hate it in interviews when you ask that question and the person spends 10 minutes answering the question. So it should be like, 2 minutes max. And then you can say, and I'm happy to elaborate on anything else.
So the other thing that I think is kind of woven throughout the book is this whole issue around women and emotion, right? And I mean, I spent the first 12 years of my life at a law firm where I was one of the few female partners, lots of guys, very few women, and emotion really was not on the table, right? Now I'm at a completely different place, lots of emotion everywhere, but I do think that this stereotype of women and emotion and everything else is just really difficult. And so how do you think about, and we talked a little bit earlier about, how much is too much, but how do you kind of combat that if you're trying to be a human being, particularly if you're managing a team of people and you want to be human and you have kids or whatever, but you also want to be taken seriously and be professional? How do you manage that as a woman in like a corporate environment?
I think, first of all, like you said, it really depends on the environment. I mean, there are some environments where it's like bring your full self to work, and that's great, and some environments where it's not. So I think, first of all, being aware of that. I do think that the workplace that we live in now is still very much designed by men for men, and that is changing. But that is the reality of a lot of places. So I think finding emotional role models, so women that you work with who you can say they do a really good job of balancing that and watching really closely for how they show up, what they express, what they don't express. A good question that you can ask then is, okay, for the emotion that I'm about to share, would this person share it or not? Or, would my boss share this or not? Like, it's oftentimes easier to see in others, and if they came to you, how would you react? Like, oh, that's too much information, or not. I do think, though, that for women and men, we are seeing in the last, I would say, decade or so, an importance of embracing emotion a little bit more. So we opened the book talking about Howard Schultz when he came back to Starbucks. He cried openly in front of the entire company. So women or men, it is something that is being embraced and understood that it is an asset, that emotions can help us make decisions, be motivated, communicate. So I would say don't shy away from it completely and understand that in the right moments, it can be really helpful.
So another question about being a woman in a man's world. So another thing you talk about is negotiating salaries. And it's fascinating, right? I think the study you cite is that when it's a woman negotiating for herself versus a man, the difference can be like $7,500. But women negotiating for somebody else do just as well as a man negotiating for himself. So, and I honestly, I find negotiating around salary so difficult, and I'm not like a shrinking violet. I have no problem asserting myself, but that one issue I find really difficult. So how do you do it? How do you not sell yourself short and know your value and then kind of have the conversation with someone?
Yeah. So when you're trying to come up with a number that you're asking for, you should definitely find a man, whether it's a friend or a mentor, to ask, to run the number by. Because so often, and I've talked to a lot of women about this, they say, I came up with a number, I ran it by a man, he was like, no, that's too low. And they're like, really? And he's like, yes, go higher, go, $20,000 higher. So that can help, practicing that with someone else before you get in the conversation to say, here's what I'm gonna say, can you role play this with me, is super helpful. The line that I write about in the book that has been really helpful for me that I have used is either when you're moving internally or when you're moving to a new job, you can say, I don't want my salary to be a distraction for me in this role. And the reason that works so well is that it's something that the other person agrees with. They also don't want you to be thinking like, oh, I'm not getting paid enough, and so therefore I'm not going to put enough effort into you. So you both have the same goal.
That's good. I may use that. So you touched a little bit on this earlier, but when we think about a workplace, right? A lot of workplaces have a culture that's embedded deeply in their DNA. I mean, Starbucks is a good example. Like, there is a Starbucks culture. At WeWork, we think we have our culture. If you feel like where you're working is really, there are things about the culture that you want to change, whether it's they're more embracing of emotion, or they're more embracing of women, or they're more embracing of change even, what's the best way to make that change as one person in an environment where there is a very embedded culture?
Yeah, so culture is something that is, I think I've read studies, it's like 80% from the founder or from leaders, which is like, oh, that's a lot, but there's still 20% that we can affect, and it's better to try and do something than to say, oh, I don't have any control over this. We talk in the book about micro actions and emotional norms, which are these like very small things that we do every day, but that add up over time. So there's just small things that you can do. So one example that we give is every time you walk down the hallway, or if you're in the kitchen with someone, you can smile and say hello and use that person's name. And it's amazing how, like, in workplaces where that doesn't happen, people are like, she just said my name, she's saying hello. But then they'll do it back to you, and then they might do it to the next person. I think also trying to share some of those norms with new people who join, or in settings where you can talk about it openly, like in a team where you know people. We read in the book about this guy who worked at the Government Digital Service Office in the UK, and he created this poster. It's called the It's Okay To list, and it's things like, it's okay to have a bad day, it's okay to ask for help, it's okay to take a lunch break. And he like sort of went rogue, and he put these posters up all over the office just to say, like, it's okay to be a human, and it's okay to do that. And he was not very high up in the organization, and the organization responded really well, and they were like, we love this. So I think oftentimes we assume that, oh, the reason that the environment is like this, or the reason these things aren't being done by leadership is because they don't want them done. Most likely it's that they are just too busy. Like, they just don't have the time to do them. And so they will actually be really grateful that you are taking the time to make the work environment better.
So I think we only have about 5 minutes, but I really want to look at some of the drawings. Do we have the feedback one? So I love this, because we spend a lot of time at WeWork thinking about kind of giving intentional feedback, and it's really hard to give good feedback, and it's really hard to receive feedback. And this, to me, is perfect, because you're going along and everything's great, and you think you're awesome, and then somebody says one thing, and you're like, oh my God, I suck. And so how do you But at the same time, we spend a lot of time talking about you should be giving feedback, and some of it's negative, but you want it to be constructive. Like, how do you do that well, and how do you receive it well?
Yes. So if you're giving feedback, the best feedback, there's three things. So the first is that it's specific. And what's really unfortunate is that women and people of color oftentimes do not receive specific feedback. Again, this goes back to we're living in a man's world still, and oftentimes men are giving the feedback and they may not feel comfortable giving critical feedback. So they just sort of say these platitudes. So then on the receiving end, if you don't get specific feedback, you want to ask to make it more specific. So you can say, thank you for that feedback. I really want to work on that. To help me work on that, can you give me a specific example? The second is it's generative. So it's saying, it's pointing to things that the other person could do. So instead of just saying, don't do this, say, do this. And the third is that it's about bridging the gap. So it's saying, you're here, I want to help get you to here, and here's how I'm going to help you do that. Like, I know you want to be a manager, so in service of that, here's some behaviors that I would like to see. It just shows that you're on the person's side. When you're receiving feedback, negative feedback is really hard and it cuts deep. So I think if you get it, take the time to sort of process it and then go back to the person if you want more specific feedback. So I got some feedback recently that I needed to be warmer with our clients, especially when I first met them. Again, I'm an introvert. It takes me a long time to warm up. So it's like so hard to hear that about yourself. But so I had a phone call. I took it in. I sort of took the night to digest it. And then the following morning, I said, okay, I've digested that feedback now. I would love to talk to you about ways that I can do that. Let's have a generative session where you can help me brainstorm ways to do that. I wasn't able to do that in that call because I was too wounded. I think you can also, Liz, my co-author, she keeps a smile file. So when she does get a piece of bad feedback, she can look at all of the positive pieces of feedback that she has received before, which is she has 90 pieces of feedback, and then she has, one negative piece of feedback, and it stings so much, but it's nice to look back. Also, you can remember that feedback is objective. It's subjective. It's never objective. And so, if you get a piece of feedback that isn't sitting right with you, understand that that's just one person's opinion.
So do we have time for one more? So then the other one that I really like is this one. So mood swings, right? 1 minute, you're amazing. The next minute, it's like the worst experience of your life. That mood swings, and this happens a lot, I feel like at high growth companies where 1 minute you're going along and then everything changes and it's literally like you feel like you're on this crazy emotional roller coaster. This situation. What do you do with this situation?
This situation. Yes. So I think the first thing is to recognize that the reason you are having strong emotions is probably because you care a lot. And that is a good thing. So I had an event earlier this morning. We were talking about that when you cry at work, especially as a woman, it can be a sign that you care, which is not what a lot of times the men who see you crying think. So just pointing out it's okay, and to sort of give yourself a break. It's okay to have strong negative emotions some of the time. That's because you care a lot. You like your job. If something's frustrated, if you didn't care about it, you wouldn't have strong emotions about it. So just go easy on yourself. The second thing I think is, and I had a therapist tell me this once, which was that we can get into the sense of catastrophizing, especially on the negative side of this is the worst thing ever. And to try to keep track of that. So I actually have a little journal where I write down the strong emotions that I feel, because then I can come back to them the next day and be like, yeah, that actually wasn't the end of the world, even though I was feeling that. So you can sort of help yourself calibrate a little bit of I know that I'm feeling this in the moment and I recognize that and it's a real feeling, but maybe it's not quite as bad because I wrote that down 5 times in the last month and I got through it.
I think also age helps. I feel
lived experience.
Right. Sometimes something that seemed now when I look back, I think, oh my God, I got so sometimes I think you have to take a step back and think, in a year's time, will I even remember this thing that seems,
Yes, in a year's time, that's such a helpful question.
Yeah. Okay, so I think time's up. Everybody should get this book. It's amazing. I literally have not had time to read anything, and this is the one book that I read when I was on vacation with my 2 crazy children in Mexico, and it really was incredible.
Thank you so much.
So it's really amazing. And I think you're going to sign copies later, yes?
Yes,
We have
yes.
you
There's
for a little
copies
bit
over
longer?
there. Alyssa is selling them, so they're available to buy. Yeah.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you
Fantastic.
for being here. Thank you.